Welcome back, everybody, to DissedMedia, A Startup Story, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes of starting a business from the ground up. And we've been chronicling our venture as a business, as a media business, which, as a lot of you know, when I first started this thing and even have this pinned to our TikTok, I don't have a background in media. I have a background in business and academia. And this venture of media was completely new to me, but wanted to get into it for a lot of reasons. Primarily, we hear about social media a lot. We hear about SEO, about putting posts out there, putting yourself out on social media, trying to garner a following. And quite honestly, it's much easier said than done. It requires discipline, practice, putting things out there that work and don't work and testing it, looking at the numbers and doing all kinds of stuff. And we've learned a lot in our startup journey of becoming what we have moved into. The funny thing about entrepreneurism, funny thing about starting a business is you don't ever sometimes plan for it. Like sometimes life just happens and you find yourself in a situation saying, oh, I got to do something. And you figure it out. Our next guest, that is a kind of their story. I'm happy to welcome to the podcast today, Lindsay Pinchuk. Lindsay, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Ben, for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time to share your knowledge and your wisdom. And we get to learn from you. And I love that because this is something that we try to do often, is create an environment where people can learn that starting a business, being an entrepreneur, it can be fun, but it's a lot of work.
Yes, and I'm happy to share whatever you feel is needed for your community. I am not a gatekeeper at all, and I think we learn best from each other. And I think as entrepreneurs, the best lessons that we learn are from one another, truly.
I'm glad you said that. One of the things I wanted to ask about, because looking into your origin story a little bit, you fell into entrepreneurship, it seems. Tell me a little bit about how you got into what you're doing today and maybe the path that led into that.
Yeah, so I actually had a corporate career I loved. I worked in magazine publishing, which I loved it. I worked at the Hearst Corporation for publications like Redbook and Good Housekeeping. And there was not a day that I woke up that I was like, I don't want to go to work. I loved what I did. And around the time that my husband and I were starting a family or trying to start a family, I said to him, there's really nowhere for me to meet other women who are pregnant. And I was like, there has to be some kind of business in this. Like there's prenatal yoga, but it's at 5 p.m. and I work in the Loop until 5 p.m., which I'm in Chicago. And so there was really just nowhere for me to connect with other expectant moms. And so I said, I think I'm going to start hosting some events to bring this community together. There really is nothing here in Chicago. And so we got pregnant pretty fast, and I announced this business, but at the time it wasn't like a business. It was just, I called it Bump Club. And I announced it, and I announced it before I announced my pregnancy, actually. So people were kind of like, that's weird. And I think everyone expected that I was going to, have a baby at some point soon, because my husband and I at that point had been married for about 4 years. And so I started hosting events for expectant moms. I actually announced my pregnancy the week of the very first event. And it was very word of mouth. This was in 2010. You have to think back to what social media looked like at that point, and it really was non-existent. It was kind of right after Facebook dropped the EDU email situation and you were able to go on, but there were no business Facebook pages. Instagram didn't exist then. And there was just really it was a very different space than it is now. And so I started hosting these events for expectant moms, very word of mouth. It was like, do you know someone who's pregnant? Send them to Bump Club. And all throughout my pregnancy, every month, I hosted an event or two in Chicago. Now, people who know me know I don't really do things half-assed. And so I was like, we have to get gift bags and I want to get products for giveaways. And I worked in ad sales and sponsorship. So I was very well-versed in reaching out to corporations and companies, and I started to do that. And so we started hosting free events, then paid events. And then I started having brands say to me, I'd like to sponsor these events. I had 100 women that were coming to dinners every single month that were pregnant, and it's very hard to reach pregnant women. I mean, you have 6 months to really capture them. And so I started hosting these events. And then I had my baby. I had my first daughter. And after I had her and I was on maternity leave, she was thankfully a very good sleeper. And I had a lot of time to continue with this business and to see where it went while I was on maternity leave. I went back to the corporate job after 3 months, and I had a very nasty boss. And she told me that if she heard that I had a side hustle and that if she found out that I was working on my side hustle during her time, there were going to be consequences. Those were her words. And I told my husband, I think that I need to leave. I said, I don't think I can work for someone like this. And I think I'm going to give this a shot. And I asked myself the question that I asked before making every big decision. It's my litmus test. I said, what's the worst that happens? And the worst that happened was that it didn't work out. And I went back and found a corporate job. And the second question to that is, can I live with that? And the answer was yes. And so I quit my job. And it was a very big change for our family. I had a really nice salary, I had a very nice expense account, and all of a sudden I was on my own, and we had a nanny, and I cut her down to 3 days a week, and there were a lot of changes. But I became an entrepreneur, and within the first year I was able to hire my first employee. I started this company, just by doing 2 events a month. We were doing, by the end of the second year, probably 4 or 5 events a month in Chicago. And we started hosting events in other cities. Because of word of mouth and people talking about this to their friends, I had women in Austin, women in Minneapolis reaching out to me, and we started expanding. Through a lot of the partnerships with the baby brands, I then had Target and Nordstrom reach out to me. And I started doing very big programming for them. And I essentially grew this company to reach 3 million people a month, and we were generating 7 figures in revenue. And you have to remember, there's no product. It was just a community. It was a media company, essentially. And in the summer of 2018, I was approached by 3 different entities for possible acquisition. Oddly, all of them through LinkedIn. It was very weird. And I ended up, it was kind of really coincidental. But I ended up selling the business in 2019, and I went and worked for the new corporation for 2 years. I was the face of this company, and so it was kind of one of those things that I had to go. I had to go with the company. It wouldn't have made sense for me not to, but it was not a great situation. And after 2 years, I decided it was time to exit, and I really wanted to help other women business owners. I wanted to help other women business owners grow their business like I did, which was with 0 investment. I bootstrapped the whole thing, and very simple marketing practices. I'm a marketer at heart. I understand how it works. And a lot of times I see businesses leave out a lot of very basic, critical strategies from the get-go. And so I was like, how can I take my experience and teach it to other women? And so I started my second company at that point after I left, called Dear Found Her. And Dear Found Her started originally as a podcast, and now it is a mentorship, it is a newsletter, it is a networking community. We have events in person, all for women business owners over 40 who are navigating entrepreneurship. And that's how I got to where I am today. I mean, obviously there's a lot that happens in between, but that's the headline. Those are the headlines.
As you were giving the rundown there, early on as I'm listening, what I'm hearing is this transition. It's a big disruption to leave a very well-paying job to go on your own. And how much time were you giving yourself? Like, how much runway did you have? Because I know you said the initial investment was small, which is good. But what was is it 6 months, a year, 2 years, and then we're going to have to do something about this?
I have to be honest, because you said like you kind of fell into entrepreneurship. I never really thought about that. I kind of just, in my head, I'm so grateful that I have such an amazing and supportive husband, and he had a great job. He has a great job now, and he did at the time. And I kind of just knew that if it wasn't working, that I would find something else. And that was it. You have to remember, this business I didn't have a product. There wasn't a lot of overhead. If I ever had to shut down the business, it would have been very easy to do. It was a community, and it was, basically an online database. And then eventually we had social media and partnerships, and the business was largely me. It was largely me and my relationships. And so I kind of just had the notion that as long as it was working, we would continue doing it. And yes, there were definitely moments that I was like, oh my God, should I keep going with this? I would say within the first year and a half, we were generating well over 6 figures. And it was really within the first 3 years that we had our first 7-figure year. And so, it was really, I would say it was a first-class education in business. I mean, I have a master's degree in integrated marketing communications. And yes, I had to take a finance class, one that I hated during that degree. But, this was hands-on business experience. Like, I learned business by building one. And, I really, maybe it wasn't so smart that I did it like that, but I wanted to give it a go. I also, oddly, like during the first 6 months, I had multiple people within the magazine industry reach out to me and ask me for consulting projects and ask me if I wanted to, do anything on the side. I actually declined them all because I wholeheartedly felt I had to give everything to my business. But just knowing that I was still relevant and people still were thinking of me, I knew that if I needed to go back and find a job, it wouldn't be a hard thing to do. But I think if it ever got to a point where my business was losing money and I wasn't able to pay myself and it was detrimental to my family, then I would have closed it. And that was it. And that was how I thought about it.
Funny that you mentioned media and you're there in Chicago. Years ago, when I was working with Coca-Cola, I was also working with News Corp at the time. They used to have an office there on Wacker, East Wacker, I believe. And anyway, the reason that we would go there is, we were doing a lot of projects with advertising, and they're the ones who did all the mailers and the little placards on shopping carts and, bus terminals and all kinds of stuff. It seems like Chicago's kind of a big media town.
It's a huge media town. I think it's changed a lot. I do think over the years it's changed a lot. But when I was working in media, it was like the height of media. And every publication had ad sales offices here. A lot of the very large media agencies are here. Starcom is here. OMD is here. Spark is here, which is a subsidiary of Starcom and Leo Burnett. There's so many different big agencies here as well. And yeah, it is a huge town for media.
As you tell the story, you kind of layer it, and I know some of this is because it's almost very normal for you to kind of work in these circles and build this thing. But I think for some people hearing it, it's kind of like, how do you go from not having anything to scaling up to a 6-figure revenue, finding sponsorship? What are some of those guerrilla tactics you were using to kind of rope people in? And were these relations like some pre-established relationship with outside vendors or anything like that? Like, how did you get into that?
So the very first thing that I did was I said to myself, okay, who can I partner with that also wants to reach expectant moms? And from the very start, from the very first event, I did a prenatal workout with a boutique fitness studio here. And then I did a shopping event with a maternity store here. And then I hosted a dinner with a company called Giggle. They don't exist anymore, but they used to have like a big baby registry. And so I partnered with the right entities that also were reaching the people that I wanted to reach. I put community first, and that is what I think is very, very important to note. Like, I was not in this to make money at first. I mean, it was all about the community. It was servicing expectant women and making sure they had the best resources, the best knowledge, the best education, the best experts, and then that they got to meet each other and form community. So by putting community first and partnering with the right entities, I allowed myself, my company, Bump Club, to get in front of new customers. So that's how I really grew the customer base. It was very organic. It was borrowing other people's audiences by bringing my people in to merge with their people. And that was really how I started, but that never went away. Even when we were working with brands like Target and Nordstrom, we were still partnering grassroots in many cities across the country with other parenting resources, parenting experts, stores, parenting classes, expectant parent classes. Like, partnerships were a really big part of how we got this business off the ground, and we built our database from that. Now, when we started hosting events, I right away just blindly started reaching out to brands through their website saying, I'm hosting events for expectant moms. Would you like to sample any products? I knew from being pregnant and from going to register that you would register and Target, Buy My Baby, wherever would give you like a big kit of samples. I knew that these brands wanted to reach these moms. And so the first event, maybe we had like 5 or 6 items at the most that were sampled, And I reached out to a couple of like local people, like maternity boutiques and baby gear like stores, and asked if they would want to do a giveaway. And I said to them, in exchange, will talk about your product and service in front of this room full of expectant moms. And our very first event was 50 local expectant moms. And while that doesn't sound big, 50 local expectant moms have the spending power. It's actually unbelievable. I mean, these are women who are buying and needing things in a crucial time of their life.
And they're going to need it next week and the following week,
yes,
too.
And they're going to need it very quickly. So what I did to start was anyone who was giving me product and anyone who was being a part of the event, I put their logo on the marketing materials for the events. And then, lo and behold, a lot of the brands were sharing them. And then people started reaching out to me. And they were like, how do we get into these events? And so the whole point of me sharing this kind of like very minutia step-by-step is like, you just have to build it. You have to really start from the ground up and build upon it. I was able to then turn around and say at my third event to a bunch of bigger brands, national brands, hey, we're working with Giggle. I know you're sold at Giggle. These are some of the companies who have sampled previously. Would you be interested in being part of this event? Of course, if we're working at a retailer where these products are sold, a lot of the brands started reaching back to me. And I started relationships with them. And I started having calls with them. And I started going to the trade shows and meeting them in person. And from there, the very first company that reached out to me, there were actually 2, and I could never remember which order it was in, but both Graco and Summer Infant both reached out to me within the first 6 months and said, okay, the samples are great. We love sampling at your events, but we want to do more. Can you put together a sponsorship package for me? And so I did. And I didn't know what they were going to pay. I didn't even ask. I think I said like, here's for $2,500, you can do this. And they were like, okay. And so then I built from there. And then more brands saw that those companies were working with me and they wanted to get involved. And so it really is taking this foundation and building upon it and letting the brands know, well, these brands are taking part of our events because we have an amazing community. Do you want to be a part of it too? It's very simplistic. Like, it's not anything like technology based. It's not like I built some crazy database or whatever. It really was building from the ground up and using my community and my relationships and my knowledge about advertising and marketing to get these products in front of the right consumer. And what ended up happening was we eventually were working with so many of the baby brands that both Nordstrom and Target reached out to me because they saw and they heard from their vendors that we were working with them and they wanted a piece of that too. And so that didn't happen in year 1. I mean, that was like year 3 or 4 that they both reached out to me, but it was at the same time actually. And so does that answer your question? Like it?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And what I was thinking about as you were saying that is that each of these things are building on each other.
Yeah.
And what I love about this story is that, and this goes back to just good old-fashioned hustle. Like, you just picked up the phone and called people and said, hey, here's a product and a brand. I wonder if they would be interested. And to be honest with you, I think that for a lot of people is not always easy to do.
No.
They're a little shy to make a phone call, afraid that they're going to get rejected. And it's funny because the way you tell the story is like, oh, they said yes and they said yes, but I'm sure you ran into rejection across.
For sure. And especially in the beginning, like I was the new one on the block, and there was another company who actually I later became friends with the founders, Big City Moms in New York, and they were doing very similar things to me in New York, and they hated me because I was doing something similar in Chicago, and I didn't really know about them when I started, but they weren't in Chicago and I wasn't in New York. And I would run into like budget constraints. So like, especially in the beginning, like I would reach out to a brand and they're like, oh, well, we spent our whole budget this year with Big City Moms. But then like the next year, they allocated budget for me too, because I was in Chicago, and there's not just moms in New York, there's moms in Chicago also. So yes, and there were definitely plenty of brands who they would say to me, oh, we don't have any budget, but we'll send you swaddles to sample. And to some degree, that was fine because I had these amazing gift bags. Like if you go on YouTube and you search Bump Club and Beyond, you can see people unboxing our gift bags still to this day. Like they're amazing videos. They were like these gift bags were worth $200-$300 in product. And so I needed the product, but it got to a point eventually where I had to say to these brands, that's so great that you're sampling in my bags and you're getting the exposure, but your swaddles don't pay my bills. So we need to find some way to also have some kind of monetary component for sponsorship. Our community is very valuable to you. But it took time to get to that point, right? Like it was a lot of reputation building and hosting events that people were coming to. And I had pictures and videos and really building this viable concept and showing the brands, these are the women that are coming, they're selling them out, they're your audience, and you want to reach them. And you want me to talk about them. You want me to talk about your product to them.
That is really awesome. I mean, I just love the way that this is a niche market. And I recall from when my wife and I, when she was pregnant, the amount of study that you put into baby products. And all of a sudden you become the baby product expert. I was actually just saying the other day as we were, driving around town, I said, there's no more Babies R Us. There's no more Bye Bye Baby. There's like where is that place you go now to be, if you're an expectant mother, where do you go to? I mean, sure there's
I'll
Target,
tell you, you
Walmart.
go to Babylist, which is an online registry aggregator, which we did a lot of work with them back in the day when they first started and we were starting. And then you go to Target. Like Target still has a registry, but you have to remember, like the people who are working the registry at Target, they're not car seat techs. They're not experts in the baby space. It's a very different situation. And then there's independent retailers, which there are still a lot of independent retailers intact in the baby space, but there are a lot who have gone under.
Yeah. It's really been disrupted a lot by online and everything else. But okay, transitioning, because I know that was a chapter and you've continued to evolve and do other things. So as you move from this business, and sounds like at some point you transitioned out of it, you sold it, did not necessarily didn't have the enthusiasm around it maybe as you did before. How did you find your next thing to focus on?
So it was interesting after I sold the business, everyone thinks when you sell a company, it's all rainbows and unicorns and everything is amazing. And this was not. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this stage. I mean, even this little 2-year period where I was in a very corporately abusive situation. And the people who bought my business made a lot of promises that were not fulfilled. They were in breach of contract as well.
If you don't mind, let me interrupt you for a second. How many employees did you have when you sold?
So I had 10 when I sold, and then I had like maybe another 10 that were contractors. Okay.
So, and you probably got to know these people really well.
Yes, they were all part of the sale. Like every one of my employees came to the new company except for one who was moving, and so she was not included in the sale. She's actually still someone that works with me to this day, funny enough. But yeah, so that was our team when I sold.
Yeah. And I think as a founder, as a business owner, when your people move to a new thing, you want to make sure they're taken care of. Sounds might not have necessarily been a great transition.
The transition was not great. At first, we were like the shiny new object of this, multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, which they were. The company that bought me was an agency who owned a lot of B2B agencies. And the interesting part of our business was that we were B2B and B2C. And so it was just, there were a lot of growing pains. There were a lot of power struggles with who was going to handle certain parts of our business. They bought me for my relationship with Target. And then when we got into the new business, they told me someone internally on their team was going to manage Target. Well, the Target relationship was successful because it was a relationship. And they eventually gave it back to me. But it was just, there was a lot of it wasn't even miscommunication. There was just a lot of mismanagement of the sale. And, it took about a year and a half for me to be like, I don't really want to do this anymore. And at the same time, you have to remember too, my kids were aging up and I was starting to feel like I was irrelevant to be the face of a company in the baby space when my kids were like in elementary school. And I was not pushing kids in strollers anymore. So to be talking about strollers to my community felt very disingenuous. And I built the whole business on the authenticity of me being a parent. So my big suggestion to them was to bring in a panel of other new and expecting parents to really take over as the face of me for the company. And they really didn't want that. They just kept putting me in front of everything. And then COVID happened. And I all of a sudden was on Facebook Lives and Zooms almost every night of the week for millions of people. We were executing this partnership with Target and it just didn't feel right anymore. And I knew that I needed to start thinking about my next step. And so it was a very long process. There was a lot of legal involved. And finally, in the summer of 2021, so we closed on the deal in January of 2019. And in the summer of 2021, we finally reached an agreement for my exit. And I was dragged through the mud and I was at my lowest point. Like I was severely stressed and depressed and I knew I needed to leave. And through that process, I also knew that I one day needed to share this story and I needed to share with others because I did not want this to happen to other people. And I also felt like when I finally left the business and I took a minute, which I did, we took a vacation, and it was on that vacation that I thought to myself, well, what was it that made Bump Club so successful? And it really was this very organic approach to marketing and this very simplistic way that I did things. And I was like, I need to teach other small business owners how to do this. I think so many small business owners are chasing the next trend and, pointing and dancing on social media, and they're forgetting about these very basic principles that when you put them into place will help you to grow a business. And I created a framework. And the framework is called SWEEP. It stands for social media, website, emails, events, partnerships, and publicity. And that is what I did to build Bump Club and beyond. And so when I came back from this trip and after kind of digesting and taking some time, I was like, I need to do something to support women entrepreneurs. And I started my podcast. And I started really just interviewing people within my women founders in my network and sharing their stories. And from there, people started asking me, well, can I hire you? Can you mentor me? I want to meet the other people who are listening to this podcast and who are commenting on social media. And so from their comments and their feedback, I first started a mentorship. And then at the end of the first year of the first cohort of the mentorship, they were like, we don't want to leave. And so I created a networking group for them that other people were then able to join. I launched a newsletter. And my whole goal is really just to share these very easy tactics that anyone can and should be applying to their business in order to grow it. And that's where I am today.
I'm sure getting courted by a company that says, "Hey, we want to buy you," and I'm sure they came at you with all sorts of, "This is going to be great, and we're going to do this, that, and the other." And unfortunately, none of that. Well, maybe some of it, but sounds like maybe a lot of it didn't come to fruition. How, if for business owners that are out there that are maybe being courted by people who are interested in creating a partnership, what are some things that you might say in retrospect that you wish you would have done when you were going through it?
Yes, and this is such a great question, Ben, so thank you for asking. The first piece of advice that I'm going to give actually came from another female founder and a friend of mine, Jill Smokler from Scary Mommy. Oddly enough, we didn't know each other at the time, but the company who bought hers was one of the companies who was courting me, and it wasn't the company that I went with, but she also had her own issues, so I guess it's neither here nor there. But one of the things she said to me when I interviewed her for my podcast that I wish that I had really put into practice during this process was, if someone is coming to buy you and they're expressing interest in buying you, they will wait. If they want you, they will wait and they will adhere to whatever it is that you need. Like, they will be respectful of you And if you need a little bit more time, they will wait for you. And I will say that I felt very rushed in my decision. I knew I wanted it to happen. And that's the thing that I think is so important to point out. Like, I wanted to sell this business. I did not want to be in the bump club business anymore. I was ready to exit. I was ready to like stop. I was just like pounding the pavement all day, and I just didn't want to do that anymore. And I wanted the resources to be able to grow this business, which was what I was promised. But I do wish that I would have had that in my head, because I think I could have been a little bit tougher. I mean, I had an attorney also, obviously, and I think we could have been a little bit tougher on our negotiations. The other thing too is when you are negotiating in this realm, especially with a very big company that has billions and billions of dollars and you do not, obviously they're going to have the upper hand. You really have to go into the negotiation knowing what is your make or break and knowing what you need to have to be happy in this situation. Now, I do think the other thing to point out is when you're in this situation, you have to know there's going to be compromises. And people are like, well, why? People always say to me, like, well, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, you don't always get to choose when you have like this billion-dollar company breathing down your neck. But you have to know and be comfortable with the decisions that you make. And I am comfortable with what happened and with the decisions that I made. What I do wish I did differently was I wish that I had some different terms set up in my contract. I think it would have made leaving a lot easier. That was number one. Like, it was really hard to leave because I was the face of the company, and there were like a lot of things in that contract that were just precluding me from leaving gracefully. And I also would say you want to get as much money as possible up front and not on an earnout. And I had a big earnout. Because I was a community and I was being bought on growth. That's what I was being bought on. However, the resources that were promised me to help me achieve that growth were not realized and were not given to me. Even some of them that were written in the contract. And so I think that's important to note as well. When you're dealing with a very big company, and I hear this a lot when I talk to other founders, oftentimes they know that if you're this small potatoes company that, they're paying 7 figures to buy you, you're not going to take that money and turn around and sue them when they're in breach of contract, which you're not, or else you're going to end up with nothing. And they knew that. And that was where the corporate bullying situation came in. Like, they knew that I was not going to do that. And so, I think just having things in writing and understanding that when you are bought, it is no longer yours. It doesn't matter what anyone tells you during the negotiation. I was told business as usual, it's going to be business as usual, but we're giving you rocket fuel to grow your business. I was told we want Bum Club to be a household name. We want your face. We want you to be, it is not yours anymore. And you have to walk into that sale knowing that it's not, you don't have control anymore.
So they built some pay incentives based on performance, but then neglected to provide the resources for you to hit those targets.
Correct. They did that. And then the other thing that happened was with the Target situation, like Target was our largest revenue driver. And when we were acquired, they immediately put someone from their team on the Target business, and they took it from underneath.
So how are you supposed to maintain the growth potential when they've siphoned off?
Correct. And the interesting thing that happened with this was I was fighting to get it back the entire first year. And the woman that they gave it to, as it turned out, never reached out to Target to begin with because she was looking for a new job, and she left. She left the company at the end of the first year, and she went to Salesforce actually. And so when she left, I said to them, like, this is like, I need to have this back in my control because no one else has the power or the understanding of what this relationship looked like. And so they gave it back to us. And within 6 weeks, my team had turned on a deal with Target that was like our largest deal post-acquisition. It was a 7-figure, to put it into perspective, our Target relationship prior to acquisition was a 6-figure deal, like low 6-figure. And this was a mid 7-figure deal in 300 Target stores, and it was supposed to be March of 2020. So Obviously,
right in the sweet spot.
correct. But what ended up happening was Target came to us in February, at the end of February, and they said, we're going to have to cancel this because there's all of these like rumblings about what's going on with this potential virus. And before lockdown, I said, it was about a week or two prior, I said to the company, we need to take this online. Over my dead body, are we losing this revenue? And we have to take this online. And so before lockdown even took place, I had employees fly into Chicago. We led a webinar from a hotel ballroom. We ended up having a call to action where our fulfillment center sent out gift bags to the people who were slated to come to the stores. So we distributed 10,000 gift bags via mail. And this all took place before March 13th of 2020. And it was so successful. And we were online when lockdown happened that Target ended up coming back to us and saying, let's keep going. And so
now that everybody's online.
Yes. And so we ended up, but we had a leg up. We were already doing it with them. And so we were able to continue the support to the expectant parent community through the initial stages of lockdown when everyone was trying to figure it out. We were already there. And this was a program that they ended up renewing it many times. Even after I left Bump Club in 2021, they were still working with Target. However, it was too late for my earnout. And that was the unfortunate situation.
Man, it was such crazy times, but what a weird instance that you had this instinct for what was coming without having any idea what was coming.
Yeah.
That is amazing. So transitioning away from that business, and now you're doing something, as you mentioned before, more podcasting, more speaking, engaging with others, helping small businesses, women-owned businesses really flourish and thrive from some of these things that you've learned, which is amazing because one of the things, what we try to do, we try and attack things from kind of an academic learning standpoint. We provide, put a lot of content out there around leadership and management and mentoring and things of that nature. But I love the fact that you are targeting a very good group. In fact, I think I was reading recently that African-American female entrepreneurs are the largest and fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in this country right now.
That statistic does not surprise me.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And it's funny because I've been saying this for years. I've been teaching for 20 years now. And year in and year out, the student that I see the most engaged, most often in class, African-American females, continue to focus on the education, continue to thrive and getting degrees and going into business. And it is definitely, now seeing this kind of correlate years later to that kind of statistic, to your point, it doesn't surprise me at all. When working with people today, what are some of the things that you are noticing? What are some of the challenges maybe that that entrepreneurs, especially female entrepreneurs, tend to face? Is there anything that kind of is frustratingly the same and it hasn't moved?
Yeah. So I work with my whole thing is I work with women who are over 40 mainly. So the challenges for this set of women and why a lot of women come to me is that they are so overwhelmed by all of the marketing options that are out there and by the digital marketing and social media that oftentimes they just can't wrap their heads around it. And they also they don't want to put their face on social media. They're like very afraid to do it. And so we start very simply and we start very small. And the first thing I give my mentorship to do is to tell their story. And oftentimes they're very apprehensive because they don't want to share anything personal. And I'm like, I promise you, when you share your story, who you are, what you do, how you do it, and why, when you share it and you can just put a picture up and write a caption, that's going to be your most engaged piece of content that you ever shared. And without fail, it always is. And it's really breaking things down and giving these like step-by-step piecemeal instructions to get these women confident enough that they can also partake in the social media game, that they can also put themselves out there, and that guess what? Hey, if you're over 40 and you're starting a business, you're starting with decades of experience.
Yeah.
And it's really reminding them of that and getting it out of their heads that like they have every right to have a place at this table, as do the young founders that are all over TikTok. So I think that is really a common theme that I see. And I would say that's why 99% of the women come to me when they do.
And something that is really interesting is that, and two, what I find a lot of our audience tends to be, even for the daily pitch, I've kind of focused on those people who are starting that second chapter career. You did 20, 25 years at a company, kind of building things out, but now you're over 40. You're thinking about getting into management consulting, getting into coaching, getting into, helping others. And to your point, I think a lot of people struggle with, how do you take advantage of social media? How, you mentioned it earlier that you do podcasting, you have a newsletter, you have a website. And a lot of people, they hear that and they're like, gosh, how do you even start that? Where do you even begin with? The other thing I love that you mentioned is authenticity. And one of the things that I continue to find, so many people want to hear the genuine story. We have always tried to, with this podcast, it kind of launched as behind the scenes. Hear it, we're either gonna go bankrupt, we're gonna fall apart, or something. We're gonna make something of it. But either way, people are gonna learn from it, and that's kind of the way we've approached this. And I think people really appreciate that, not trying to hype it up like you often see in social media, and people saying, taking these selfies and Instagram photos and everything with environments that positive up all the time. It just isn't.
No, it isn't. And I will say that the number one compliment I get, and I had this the other day, I gave a speech the other day, and a lot of the women who came up to me after, they were like, you're the same. They were like, you're like, just like you are on social media. I'm like, yes, no shit. I was like,
you gotta be.
I don't show up differently on social as I do in person. And I never have. Even before social media was a part of the business landscape, I was showing up on my blog and I was sharing things and I was being vulnerable as an expectant mom. And I think that it's really important to not only share the positive, and you often connect better with your community when you share the crappy things that happen to you in business or in life, and people see that you're human and they relate to you. And that is a big piece of what I share on a daily basis on both my personal and my professional accounts. The other thing you just asked me is, how do you get started? And I really appreciate this question because, to your point, I think a lot of people see all these things and they get overwhelmed. And my answer to that is, you pick one. Pick one place to start and get really good at it. And once you're good at it, then you can add a second thing. So for example, my podcast, I started with the podcast. And then and when I started the podcast, I just had my one personal Instagram account, Lindsay Pinchuk. And then I realized about a year in that maybe a little less. It needed its own Instagram account. And so I created an Instagram account. But the content that I shared there was very much repurposed content from the podcast. It wasn't like I was creating all new content for it. I really took the content and I repurposed it. And then now I have this newsletter and I repurposed the content from the podcast and from the social media, and I repurpose it for the newsletter. And so it's just another touch point that I usually share very similar themes, very similar stories. And it's part of my framework, which is sweep. And that's, you have to be in all of these places, but not in all of these places with a different message. You want to be in all of these places with the same message. And then you're known for something.
That's really important, and something that I learned early on when I first, outside of this, like when I first just got into the social media thing, we would all love to think that we're going to create a post and everyone's going to see it and then magic will happen. The reality is sometimes they need to see it 2 times, 3 times. Sometimes they need to see it on LinkedIn versus X versus Instagram. And it's not that it's, to your point, it's not that it's different. It's just that it's framed differently for that platform, but it's ultimately kind of the same content. It's repurposed, as you mentioned. And yeah, there's people who find us on YouTube, who eventually find us on other social channels, who eventually find the podcast, or the website first. And you just never know where you're going to pick up your audience from. I love that message of get good at one thing and then broaden out from there.
And that's really how you get started. And truly, like that's what, and I also I think it's really important to point out, this didn't happen overnight. Like I just launched my newsletter this year. I'm 4 years in. I mean, it takes time.
It does. As one of our early board members said, audiences take time, and that they do. Well, Lindsay, one of the things I wanted to make sure that people do know is, how do they reach you? How do they find you? I know you've got an audience of people out there, but if this is the first time we're learning about Lindsay, how do we connect?
Yeah, the best place is to find me on Instagram at Dear Found Her, and you could also go to dearfoundher.com. That's my website, and there's my email and everything is there as well. I would say those are the best places to reach me.
Awesome. Well, Lindsay, I appreciate all that you've shared. Man, what a journey! Well, just from building it out of something that you identified the fact that there was an audience that had to be there. There were other people like you that had to be out there looking for this information, and scaling that up into a multi-million-dollar opportunity, and then now transitioning to this other element that you do as well. Lindsay, any parting words, messages, things that you'd like to say as we kind of bring things to a close?
I would say, like, if you're an entrepreneur, don't sweat the small stuff. And I know that sounds really cliche, but I think it's very easy to get hung up on making sure everything's right and the little details. And don't sweat that stuff. Like, people don't remember those things anyway. Only you do. And it's really just the most important thing to get started and to be consistent and to show up consistently and with a message that is true to you and to the person that you want to be. And I think that by showing up and being yourself, that in and of itself is the number one thing that you could be doing for your brand and your company.
That is awesome advice. That is so well appreciated. And like you said, sometimes we hear these messages from founders and we always hear things. It's one of the reasons, again, that we started this podcast, is because I want people to, when we get to a point where we're like, wow, this is great, and people are tuning in, we've got, this big following, go back and listen to the early episodes. Go back and hear where we started from, because it hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always been fun. And, there are challenges. You get hit with stuff. And that's a fun part of chronicling what we're doing, is people get to hear that, as it's happening. So, well, everybody, and Lindsay, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Everybody else, thank you guys for checking out DissedMedia, A Startup Story. As I say, share this with a friend, like it, give us a rating, tell us what you think. Go to our website, thedailypitch.news, and send us a message. If you hear something that you're interested in, reach out, let us know. We'll definitely get back with you. And if you have a story to share and you want to come on the show and share it with us, by all means, please do. Until next time, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to DissedMedia, A Startup Story. This podcast was produced and edited by Ben Olmos and is a production of DissedMedia Corporation. If you're interested in learning more about anything you heard on this episode, please reach out to us at podcast@dissedmedia.com. You can also get more information about this and other episodes, or information about our guests, by checking out dailypitch.news, our business and insights publication focused on helping managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what they do.